Games Workshop recently released some brand new Eldar kits, and they were kind enough to send a few over to me. And I gotta be honest, historically Eldar have not been my cup of tea, but I have some wild ideas for these new models. I'm especially interested in this arachnid looking hero named Lykis, Lukis, Lechis, the one that's missing a few vowels. Sometimes a new model catches your eye in such a way that you completely forget about all those unpainted models sitting on your desk. Not that any of us have a great pile of shame, mind you. I mean, I know that I don't. I immediately felt that with Lycus here, a brand new HQ Eldar model. So let's take him to the desk and make some poor decisions. First things first, I took a few creative liberties on building this model. Now, he has 8 legs. I get it. He's an arachnid. Checks out. But I'm liking how he looks with 2 less legs, so we're going to move forward with that. I took the 2 underhanging arms and I put them on top on his shoulder pads because those look most like a spider to me. I left the other 2 arms off entirely so we get this powerful silhouette. Now, to base the model, I used this ground cover called A Tale of Grimdark by Kraut Cover Scenics. They are obviously a German company based on that name. This stuff has a mix of skulls and 2-scale femurs mixed in with a variety of dirt, rocks, and 2-scale twigs, and I am a big fan of this stuff. So I built this model, did his basing, and primed him up, and I realized that with all my energy to get moving on this project, I had no plans on how I was actually going to paint it, but why let planning get in the way of a good time? So let's just put our head down and see what happens. I do know I don't want to overcomplicate things with color choice, and I've been really enjoying using a Zorn palette with a few random cold colors mixed in, so I'm going to use just that for this paint job today. One of the things I most enjoy about using a limited palette is I can just put all of the paints on my palette before I begin and make decisions on the fly. I'll use my trusty big synthetic brush to slap down colors and just get the paint moving. At this point, this big trusty brush that I've been using for a while has its tip kind of all blown out and it's curving at the end, but honestly, that's just fine. For the way that we're going to start this painting, I don't need a really sharp tip on my brush. It's actually going to force me to make big impact with color instead of worrying about the fine details here at the beginning of the paint job. The sooner I can get interesting colors all over the model, the more excited I'll be to make fun decisions as they arise. And the first decision I make on this paint job is start by placing my brightest highlights on the model first. Now, I have no idea what final colors these bright surfaces of the model will be, but because I'm starting with a light gray primer, I can make the most impact and vibrance if I put the brightest colors on first instead of putting dark colors and try to make them brighter with many layers later. At least that was my thought process on the fly while making this decision. I have no idea if this is going to work or not. Never done it before, but if I screw it up, at least then you'll learn and won't have to yourself. I then mix in a bit of the ochre color to my bright yellow and paint around those first highlights and other areas that wouldn't be quite as bright to start the transition from our brightest areas to the next brightest. What I'm doing here is just a basic light sketch, a very important foundational part to any kind of painting, especially miniature painting, since we're painting 3-dimensional objects. While I put this brightest paint on, I'm looking at each general shape on the model and trying to replicate how light would fall on that shape. Light sketches are often done in black and white to keep things simple so you can place any colors you want over the top of them later, but that would also mean extra steps and less drama in color depth, so we're not going to do that. Also, because I haven't thought any of this through, I'm not sure how much of these exact colors are going to show through in our final paint job, so I'm not worried about exactitude in color choice here. I'm just picking fun colors, I guess. And because these colors, for the most part, are all part of a traditional Zorn palette, I'm sure that they're going to work well together by the time we're done anyway. This color-infused light sketch is kind of like a warm-up exercise to our paint job. Think of it like practicing your free throws or practicing your scales on an instrument, taking time in the batting cage, or shooting at a target. These fundamental warm-up skills are the building blocks that you're going to lean on most. In this case, your understanding and interaction between lights and shapes. At this point, this model looks like he's just face first into a sunset, so I need to create some drama here. So I immediately grab my dark, desaturated blue and start putting on some harsh shadows right into the areas that would catch the least amount of light. One of the ways I've felt my paint jobs have been too boring in the past is being too restrained in my use of color. Big changes over small areas and bright pops of unexpected color can be pretty scary to slap around your model, but I encourage you to do more of it. You can always paint over it, especially since this is just the starting point of the paint job. Nothing is sacred here. As long as I'm keeping the rules of light in the back of my head, I can pretty much experiment with whatever colors I want at this stage. Once I've hit every surface of the model with some form of color, I decided I need to come back in and reinforce my brightest areas with a second coat just to help me define what are the most impactful sections of the model. And because I started this model with that bright yellow right over the light gray primer, it's so much easier to get good coverage on this second pass as opposed to if I was building up over a darker color. What I'm finding with this experiment is that it's really valuable in helping me be really sure I'm putting all my highlights where I'm supposed to. If you're ever painting a model and you're not sure where the highlight should go, try painting your next model this way, with highlights first. That way, you always have that confidence how bright something should be and where the highlight is supposed to be. I slapped some paint on the energy spider web thingy that Lycus is leaping off of, also painting it in a cold color so there's some contrast to the largely warm aeldari. As I'm painting this part of the model and then taking a look at it after this step, I'm asking myself, okay, so now what? This doesn't really look like I have a direction to go from here. I mean, I really don't want this model to have an overall orange color scheme, and I have my lights all set up, but how do I paint over the top of this without having to waste the hour I just spent getting it to this level? And unfortunately, I do not have an immediate answer to that question, but that's okay. I'm just gonna keep moving. To keep myself busy while I try to desperately come up with some kind of solution, I take some washes and drop them into the deepest holes, cracks, and crevices of the model to bring in some depth. This helps me define the details of the model that, up until this point, really weren't paid any attention. This goes a long ways to help you see all the details, whether you want to paint them in a different color later or just help them pop now. It's also generally a useful step that doesn't commit me to going a certain way with the remainder of the paint job. And I think it worked kind of, because by the time I was done with this quick washing, I think I've come up with a plan of attack. Is it a good one? Probably not, but it is dramatic, and if it's a failure, at least you'll learn and won't have to make the same mistake. Today's video is brought to us by Into the AM, and of course you know them for their amazing graphic tees, like this exclusive collaboration that I did with them that is available now. But did you also know that they have a very classy basics line, so you can really elevate your wardrobe with just a few pieces, so you can go anywhere, anytime in stealth mode, like some kind of 3-buttoned secret agent or something. My favorite are these long sleeve Henley tees. They're simple, they're elegant. I can wear them to just about any occasion. I can throw one in my suitcase while I'm traveling because I know no matter what I get into, this thing's gonna work. Into the AM's basic collection is an easy way to add some everyday staples to your wardrobe that'll make you look good without compromising on quality or comfort. So check out the link below to see their full basics line as well as everything else that they carry, because honestly, they've got a lot of awesome things to offer. And of course, by using that link, you get 10% off your entire order, no matter what you get, whether it's a 3-button long sleeve tee or anything else. A big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to le painting. I'm going to go in and paint the mid-tone of each surface on the model. So, for example, I want most of his armor to be a dark grayish, almost black color. So I'll avoid all the highlighted areas I've already painted and all the deepest shadowy areas and just paint the middle. Sounds like a reasonable plan, right? At least in my head it did, because the midtone of a surface is what our eye defines that surface to be colored as. The highlights can be influenced by the light in the environment, and the reflective shadows can also have fun colors associated. But if we get the middle right, then it should read as that color, in theory. What I'm feeling as I work through this is it's gonna look worse before it looks better. At least I hope so, because it looks worse right now, and it can only get better. Please, get better. I'm just being sure to not only leave those highlighted colors untouched, but also those interesting shadow colors that we had fun placing. And because I placed those colors over a light primer, they're gonna show up much easier than if I would have just base coated this entire model this dark gray and then tried to build up those bright tones from there. I decided to keep his helmet a bright, vibrant red because it's a centerpiece of the model. We want our eyes drawn there, so it should be the singular brightest point across all the darker things surrounding it. He also has a fair bit of details going on in this helmet, but if we keep the basic shapes all this bright red, it makes working through the rest of those details much more manageable. At a certain point, I decided to define some of the other details with edge highlights with neutral colors. This will help them feel more like a reflective metallic or an off-white hair color. But the shadow tones are just way more interesting as we build up these highlights over the top of them, as opposed to if I would have just painted them gray or black to begin with. And this, in a nutshell, is one of the best benefits to starting off with an interesting wide array of colors in your underpainting, which is why you see me do it a lot more recently, because you could add so much depth and your model looks so much better, so much faster with these cool colors. It also frees yourself from the stress of having the whole paint job figured out before you begin. When you did that weird undercoat 3 steps ago, you had no idea how it was going to influence you at this step. But guess what? It makes it look like you had it planned the whole time. I work in a dark burgundy for his shoulder carapace and upper arms to keep their midtones darker. I find that if you keep your midtones dark, you'll create more drama with wild colors you build off of them later. And because I have the rest of his armor a dark gray, this pulls those areas into a similar tonal range while they frame that bright red helmet. When you get to this point where you've established your midtones while keeping those highlights and shadow colors untouched, it's time to dig into some more details to push this model over the top. The basic guideline I'm using is, for brighter areas, I go with off-white yellows, oranges, and peachy tones for those brightest highlights. But for the rear downward-facing surfaces, I go with my wild accent cold tones. The rear of this model actually isn't boring at all. There's a lot of really unique and cool details, and I want to showcase those without making them take too much attention away from the front of the model, and these vibrant, cold highlights on there will do just that. Simply by edge highlighting the downward facing surfaces with cold colors, we add depth and a fun variety to area the model we usually don't spend much time painting. And I don't have to keep these cold tones universal across all of the dark areas. On his left side, for example, I used more of an olive green in the shadows, so I take that same base color and add a touch of yellow with some ivory mixed in to push the downward facing highlights even brighter. Sometimes when I'm doing that initial vibrant undercoat, I'll throw a random bright color in a spot that you wouldn't expect it, just to make a small puzzle for myself to solve later. And I did that here with some of these bright reds. You see, if you put these wild colors in random spots, you get to push them later and lean into that fact when you're doing this re-highlighting step. And it looks like you had some grand plan for this the entire time. The same thought process, or lack thereof, goes for the warm tones in the front of the model. I had a bunch of red in our initial steps in the paint job, but I lost a bunch of that punch along the way. I want to bring that vibrancy back, so I use the downward facing surfaces to push that red up again. I take one final pass around the model to push my brightest highlights that are mostly ivory with just a bit of our yellow mixed in, so we have an almost pure white highlight. I also push some of the reds, especially on his sword blade, a bit to really give those a reflective quality. And Before we call this model done, I do need to give a little bit more love to the base, as well as bring the spiderweb stuff down a touch with some glazes of a dark turquoise contrast paint so it's not fighting with the bright areas of focus on the model too much. And with that, my experiment of sitting down and painting a model that excites you in just one evening is complete. And I like this because I didn't have to have it all figured out before I started the paint job. I just grabbed some paints that seemed to work well together and knocked it all out using some fun colors. If you're anything like me, you've spent too many hours stressing over the right way to paint a model. And if you've ever felt this, just know that you're not alone. Just find a fun, limited color selection, put all of the paints on your palette at the start of the project, and just slap them around in mixed colors until you find your way. And not only did this model inspire me to sit down and paint it in one evening, it also inspired me to look at more Warhammer factions that I've never painted before. There's different factions in 40k and Age of Sigmar, Old World, Horus Heresy, and all the other subgenres of games that I've never tried before. So I want to do more of that in 2025, and here's where I need your help. Is there any faction that you've not seen me paint on the channel before that you'd really love to see me paint? I am open to all suggestions. Put them down in the comments below. And before we leave today, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank each and every one of you for your support. You watching these videos, you subscribing to the channel, hitting the like button, it means the world to me. I couldn't do this without you out there watching each and every video. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in another way, check out the video description below. There's a bunch of fun ways that you can support me, some that will cost you some money, some that won't. You can pick up your hobby models and supplies down there, oftentimes at a discount, and I get a small kickback. You can pick up some Ninjon merch from my merch store, or you can check out the Ninjon Patreon where I've got additional bonus content. You can hang out on the Discord. You can see my unedited footage, the long version of the models I paint, and you can see my behind the scenes weekly Wednesday videos. Now don't worry, I will be back before you know it with another new video, but just make sure that sometime between now and then you find time in your day to slay the gray.